Women for Cities. Five women share their work on sustainable urban development, building cities for all, implementing the global goals locally, leaving no one behind. What makes an inclusive and integrated city?
Yeah, for me, an inclusive and integrated city is really a question about both process and form, actually. So I would, in the first place, say that it's a city that includes the citizens from the very beginning and really takes its departure in their needs, listening at the proper needs they actually have, instead of just using common assumptions or an expert's assumptions on what should be built, actually. So that would be like the more inclusive process. And the second component is, for me, more related to urban form. Like the integrated city is really a city that is built in a way and that really takes its natural and built up environment and connects it in a mode that really responds to the needs of the citizens. So it actually makes their everyday life easier. On the other hand, I think it's super important, particularly in Northern Europe, to be humble and understand how difficult this really is. We really rely on the expertise of our professionals and on our institutions. So involving citizens, particularly in the very early stage, is usually seen as troublesome and unnecessary, because you have the democratic institutions that already guarantee that their needs are taken into consideration, which is not always the case, actually. I would say working in Northern European environments compared to slum areas, for example, in the global south, is very different. Where in those areas you actually have to and you need to take the needs into consideration, because first, you don't have money or time to lose, and secondly, it would be too dangerous, honestly, to not really respond to the needs. But I also think there is a very strong notion, particularly in Sweden, of the separation of functions that has guided and still is influencing urban development. And it doesn't really matter how much we talk about good urbanism or sustainable urban development. It might be changing in the coming generations, but many people within the profession, planners or architects or engineers, they really still have this idea of the old city.
What are the most common obstacles to sustainable urban development?
So I would say that both these practices, separation of function and a very strong belief in our institution, really hinders sustainable urban development in our part of the world. And it has obviously led to wrong priorities being made, this top-down approach. And on the other hand, the separation of function really has led to this massive takeover of motorism, and we still have cities. Stockholm is a great example that is highly guided on the principle. Putting the car in the first place.
Why is inclusiveness and integration key to sustainable urban development?
That's the only way you can do it, and not necessarily because it's the only sustainable way to do it or democratic way to do it. Also because I really truly believe that if you listen to the needs, you will do the right priorities, and you will have you will enhance quality, basically, because people actually in the street, together with experts and decision makers, together they could really do what's supposed to be done, and not running projects that will not even be used by the citizens. But I mean, on the other hand, you have to be aware that, I mean, it's difficult to do everything. So that is why we at the think tank we have initiated a project where we actually test the hypothesis. I mean, plan and build the city for girls, and it works for everyone. So basically taking a few of the SDGs like sustainable cities, gender equality, well-being, and reduced inequalities, and as a starting point, and saying that if we plan public space in a participatory manner and we design it together with girls and experts and decision makers, what happens? And will it not work for you or for me or for an older middle-aged white middle-class man that usually takes the car? And we're quite convinced. I mean, the results so far really shows in that direction, but it will be interesting to follow a hands-on development project that really tests this, followed by, you know, a strong research dimension. So we hopefully could develop some kind of model that others could be useful in other settings. But I'm truly convinced already that it works not only for those that are the furthest away from society and from these kind of processes, but also for the others. But I mean, those that we never see in urban planning, as even though you have participatory components, is the young girl in the suburb or from a socioeconomically more difficult area. I mean, they simply don't exist in the mindset, you know, which, I mean, we could, with quite a lot of goodwill, imagine how the public space or how the city could or should look like to respond to their needs, but we can't be 100% sure if you don't actually ask them.
How do you actually do it?
Our experience is that first you need a very clear vision of what you actually want and should do, and you need clear goals. And no matter what you think about the Sustainable Development Goals, I mean, they have been decided by our governments and they need to be implemented, and they're still debated, of course, but this is the framework we got. So I think we should deal with it. And many of the goals are very interesting and can really be used as framework in practical hands-on projects. So that's at least what we do. But I mean, clear visions and clear goals. I mean, it could be some coming from somewhere else, from a political vision or from very technical goals from the experts. That it could work as well. But at least having that as a framework. And then I would say, really involving all stakeholders early. I mean, either you involve people early or you don't involve them at all. Constitute groups of citizens, civil society, researchers, of course, planners, architects, and, I mean, decision makers, politicians, and civil servants. I mean, that is our experience. That's what you need to do in a very early phase. The thing that's important to bear in mind is that you need to be prepared to take their knowledge into action and not treat it as something that is not real. Because they know what they're talking about, and particularly when they talk together, all these people, then you really start with the real needs and no, you know, imaginary needs that will cost money, basically, in the long run. And really, in these days, I mean, we're talking about resilience, really be very, I mean, create very threatening environments, in worst case. But I mean, again, you need to have the professionals playing a very important role. So all these ideas and needs assessment really are translated into the professional frameworks. And I mean, nowadays there are interesting tools that are used in urban planning processes just to bridge the gap between citizens and professionals and decision makers. Because I mean, most of us we don't really read architectural drawings or engineering plans that well, do we? And building small-scale maquettes takes time. I would say that is also a prerequisite to be able to test what you've been doing and test it again and get feedback. Feedback from others that hasn't been involved, or feedback from other citizens. For example, if the girls are planning the space, I mean, you should ask their granddads and their fathers what they actually think about the space, because it's supposed to meet their needs too as well. So test and test again and test again and redo it.
Why are good practices and lessons learned so important?
I couldn't stress that enough, is to, draw lessons learned from your work. For the future, I mean, for you, for the work that you're actually conducting in that situation, which we usually do, you know, with monitoring and evaluation tools. But I mean, it doesn't have meaning in itself more than saying this was a good or a bad project. But I mean, it could really collect a knowledge bank for you, for your future projects, but really for others. I mean, both your good examples and your bad examples, your lessons learned, and you really try to formulate guidelines to various professions in the field, and really to others that would like to do what you're doing, because that's the only way to not reinvent the wheel constantly. And instead of building on what you just learned in your 3 years project, and you built this A building around the B setting, and I could actually start, you know, couldn't start exactly from where you stopped, but I don't have to redo the entire process again if I really listen to you, and honestly, if you're prepared to give me your insights.